don't think you understand the like depth of difficulty I have right now. And that was my problem. I looked the same, sounded the same, kind of was the same. And I'm like, even if I tell people, they don't believe me, right? Which is really hard.
You're listening to Now What, a podcast where we celebrate the human spirit by sharing stories of strength and resilience.
For those going through hard times or looking to get inspired to change their own life, we're your hosts, Jen and Tisha.
Hi, and welcome back to Now What. I'm Jen.
And I'm Tisha. Today we're being joined by Allison Venditti. Hi, Allison.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Do you want to just start off and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Allison Venditti. I'm the founder of Moms at Work. We are a community education and advocacy group, and I mostly do career coaching and HR consulting. And I have now slapped the title of pay transparency advocate right onto the end of that, just so people know where I sit.
There you go.
I like that.
That's
I think
awesome.
Especially now, that's very important.
Yep.
I mean, has always been, but.
Yeah. And you had filled out an application to be on the show.
Right.
And we thought that your story and your perspective is important to share with people. And I think you even said in your application that like it's a topic that sometimes isn't always talked about.
We don't talk about a lot of things.
We don't talk about a lot of things. Let's just put that right out there.
And that's why we're doing this. But I think especially, and as our listeners will learn as you go through your story, is it's kind of like one of those invisible things that people maybe can't see right off the hop. And I think that is part of the problem, I think. You know, when we can't see something, we just assume
don't talk about it.
Yeah, don't talk about it. So with that said, I think if you want to take it away, because I feel like Moms at Work, correct me if I'm wrong, came about as a result of what had happened to you.
It absolutely did. So we'll start at the end. I am in a better place in my life, and I have incredible purpose because I had a brain injury, which I share my story as most people with traumatic brain injuries do not have the slide to success. So traumatic brain injury survivors have a very high divorce rate, have a very high suicide rate, have a very high rate of all sorts of things. And I am not that person, but that has been now, oh my goodness, it's been like 7 years since I was injured, and 4.5 years since my recovery, as we say. So it's been a journey, and it hasn't been an easy one. And that's the difficult part for me. Is on the outside, I look completely normal, right? People are like, at you and your company and your things. And I have a lot of struggles that I'm not particularly open in sharing, because we either tell people like it's none of your business, or like you don't want people to treat you differently, and they shouldn't. But also for a lot of things, I'm like, I need people to know. So I'm happy to start at the beginning, because no one thinks that they're going to get a brain injury at 33. Right. That was not on my list of like to do things. So
no,
I think we're all sitting here as people who didn't think what happened to us would happen to us.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I was I'll start out by saying, like my mom got breast cancer when I was 14. Like we've had a lot of death in our family. I kind of was like ready for those types of things. But no matter how hard I prepared my life, we had wills, we had all the things, like it just nothing mattered. So to start, I was an HR professional. I, did the things, went to university, started in HR, worked in healthcare, went into consulting, had a kid or got married, had a kid, like everything's bumping along. And I had my first son when I was 30, and I had my second when I was 32. Everything's continuing to go well. And I was starting to hate my job. That happens post kids, right? You start to hate your job because work treats women differently after they have children. So I had a lot of responsibility. And then when I came back, I had not much responsibility, and I did return to work as a job. You know how delightful it is when you do return to work for a job and then people don't know how to treat you. Like, that was
as you're returning to work.
Yeah. During my return to work, I'm like, are you actually going to make me do my own return to work? Thank you. So that was fine. I was always having ideas, but when you were in a job, what do you do next? And in January, 2015, I was in bed. We were in bed in the morning. My 3-year-old bounced over the bed like 3-year-olds do, jumped up, flung himself backwards, and I got the back of his head in my face, which happens, but
Yeah.
happens all like that can happen to anybody. And let's put this out there before anybody freaks out and starts wearing, like a helmet to bed. I had 8 concussions prior to this. So I played competitive sports. I was in a skiing accident. I'd had a number of head injuries prior and kind of walked out mostly unscathed. And this one, for lack of a better term, like this one hit different. So I ended up with like left half of my face bruised. But with concussions, like nobody does anything for them, right? Like that's the standard. So any of my concussions, they were like, yep, concussion, let's check for a brain bleed. No brain bleed. Okay, take some Tylenol, rest, walk it off, shake it off. You'll be good.
TV,
watch TV, well, they always say they're like sleep, but don't fall asleep. Like don't watch anything. Like it's so like, they don't actually know what they're doing, especially family doctors. No shade to family doctors on that stuff, but they don't.
They're just not experts in it.
No, and they're not experts on anything. So it's like, I can go here or I can wait for a specialist. But I've been through this before. So I thought, okay, I'm feeling really gross. I have a head injury. I mean, they always, concussion like really minimizes it, and I was fine. But I did everything that mothers usually do. I got my kids up. I was like, I feel kind of gross, but I'm going to take my kids to daycare. Got to daycare. Daycare was like, oh my God, are you okay? Right? Like, because I wasn't making sense. I wasn't, and then I went home and I fell asleep. And, I usually with concussions, you get like 2 days, you walk it off. And finally my husband was like, you got to go to the doctor, right? Like you look like garbage. It's not getting better. You got to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I went to the doctor and he told me I had a concussion and gave me a note from work and told me to go home and sleep. And so I did, but I didn't know where things were. I couldn't see properly. I was having all sorts of other things that you just kept dismissing because I was like, they have to go away, right? Like and you say this, it's only been 2 days, it's only been 3 days.
Yeah, I've got to be patient with myself.
Right. Well, you're healing, right? Like this healing. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that's fine. Nobody else seems concerned. I'm not concerned. And I had a knee appointment at Toronto Rehab. Okay, this is where it gets weird. And when you get an appointment with a specialist, you don't miss it. So I said to my husband, you got to help me get to this appointment. And he was like, you want to go? I'm like, yes, I've been waiting 6 months for this appointment. We're going to get my knee checked out.
Yeah.
And so I went to Toronto Rehab, and the doctor who just happened to be in the outpatient clinic was a neurophysiatrist. So brain specialist for physical aspects. And I walked into his office and he was like, looked at his paper and was like, so you're here for the knee, right? Are you here for your knee? And I was like, I'm here for my knee. And he was like, what happened to your face? I was like, oh no, I hit my head. Everything's good. Like, don't worry about it. And so he did the knee thing and he was like, do you mind if I like go get some tests and we can run some tests? And I was like, okay, like weirdo. And sure enough, I failed all of them. So they have cognition tests of like, what time is it? What day is it? What street do you live on? I didn't get, like, I have my file now. I got none of them. And he had to use my intake form to call my husband because I didn't remember his phone number.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
So if we're talking about like level of ability here, it's like it's slipping fast. And it was like, okay. And then just kept getting worse. So he said, I'd like to follow up with you. Let's give it a couple of days, but like, let's see how it goes. And I said, okay, very annoyed that, I have things to do and places to go and now I can't do anything. And the headaches were unreal. And probably 3 days later, I was on the couch and I woke up and I had peed myself and my mouth was filled with blood, which I know, and meant I had a seizure, but I was like, I'm just not willing to accept that right now. And so like cleaned myself up and did that and just like didn't mention it to anybody. And I had several more. And
did they ever happen around your kids?
Yeah. So that weekend, my husband was in the basement and he came up because he thought I was knocking on the floor and it was my head. So my kids came up, he came up, kids freaked out, he freaked out. And it was really bad. So that fast tracked everything, right? Neurologist, MRIs, all the other things, every test. The good thing was that because I'd met Dr. Liu there, I was able to call and be like, please help me. Like, I don't know what's happening, but now I'm having seizures and I don't want to die. Right. So with brain injury recovery, though, is what I didn't know, even though I worked in disability management, is they can't really do any rehab until the seizures stop. So I spent about 6 months trying to get seizures under control. So during that time, I couldn't look at screens. I had permanent headaches. I didn't really know my way around my house. I didn't know how to use my phone. I like went to the convenience store across the street from my house and got lost. So they walked me home.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so my husband now has a full-time job, hoping that like I don't get out into the world. I can't pick up my kids from daycare. You lose your driver's license, you lose everything. And I bike everywhere. I can't take a bike because if you have a seizure and fall into streetcar tracks. And all of my cupboards like have labels on them because I don't remember where my forks are and I don't remember where my plates are. And I can't cook anything because I forget to turn the stove off and I'll burn the house down. So I wander around my house. I get accepted onto long-term disability. But it's taking forever. And every day I would just be like, it's got to get better. At some point, this has to get better. Like this just can't like keep going like
can't keep going on.
Going like this.
Right.
And
who's helping you with your kids at this point?
No one.
It's just you and your husband?
Yeah. Well, because this is the other thing. When you're in that constant state of I'm going to be fine, because the only thing you can do in those moments is I'm going to be fine. Like if this turns into a thing, I won't make it. And the depression and all that is very real. On top of that, people with traumatic brain injuries develop most people, incredible rage problems, right? Yeah. So it's because you damage your brain. I had uncontrolled rage. So it like my husband takes no credit for the fact that like he held our family together during all of this, but I was very anxious about other people coming into our house. I was very scared that people were going to take my kids away, right? Because I'm like, I can't be a mother. So I was very worried that I would be seen as an unfit mother, that, you know, someone would find out about, I don't know what, but you get very paranoid because you hear all sorts of things. Like I was doing nothing wrong, except I wasn't getting better. And so I told my husband, I'm like, you have to leave me. Like, you just like take the kids, leave me, it'll be better. Like, I'm just a drain on resources and whatever. He was like, okay, this is like, you're going to need to stop. I'm not like,
tone it down
there. But it was constant because I felt like such a failure as a human.
Well, you couldn't do anything.
I couldn't do anything.
Forget even being a mom or your job. Like you couldn't even go to the store across the street.
Right.
Or cook a meal for yourself. Like,
so there was a lot of like attempts to do things and I just didn't tell anybody. So I just sort of fell off the face of the earth for a while. And like, when people talked to me on the phone, it was fine, but Berta would be like, she's in bed or, whatever. Like, to be very fair, like my dad didn't know the extent of it. My mother-in-law didn't know the extent of it because I didn't want people to know. And I was belligerent in my effort that other people would like find out that I was useless and tell my husband to leave me and all, like, that was my concern. But once the seizures figured themselves out, so I have a phenomenal neurologist who's the head of epilepsy at Toronto Western, and I've seen a lot of specialists in my life because of my mother or whatever. And, like she sat with me for like an hour and a half and she's like, we're going to figure this out. We're going to figure the headaches out. We're going to do whatever, like we'll do whatever it takes to help you get back to where you need to be. And I was like, oh my God, somebody believes that I can get better.
Yeah.
But by that point, my only job was going to appointments, MRIs, CT scans, sleep scans, seizure studies. And then of course, I'm like, I don't know if you've ever seen these things, like they make you do like multiple EEGs. So I can't go anywhere with my kids. I've got tubes off my head and going down my neck and my kids are freaked out and they won't come near me because I have snakes on my head. And I'm like, this is the worst thing ever. Like, just all I wanted is for this to end. And I ended up so for someone who worked in disability management, like getting accepted onto long-term disability, I broke down. I was like, they didn't even question putting me on long-term disability. The only people that get accepted onto long-term disability are if you have cancer, a really bad brain injury, or have like lost the use of limbs. And so they just sent me the letter. And that way I knew, I'm like, I hadn't read my medical stuff yet.
But you knew it was bad.
But I was just like, I got the letter and my husband's like, that's a good thing. And I'm like, that's a terrible thing. It means I'm not going to get better and I'm going to be on long-term disability for the rest of my life. And that clearly wasn't true. But we just didn't know. This could be how I was going to be for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like very much fun. I did get accepted to the acquired brain injury program, which is, again, like not a place that anybody wants to end up with anyway, but the Community Care Access Center does it in your home. So I had people coming to my house every day, which thank you, Canadian medical care system. So I've gone through all these specialists, 75 screening things, whatever, I never saw a bill. Yay. Okay. So we're not worried about any of those things. And the CCAC stuff, all free too. So I had behavioral therapists, speech pathologists, occupational therapists. But I had to relearn how to cook. I had to relearn how to use a phone. I had to relearn how to, also my left arm wasn't working because I have nerve damage from the hit. So there's my nerves compressed in my neck. And the only way to change that is surgery. Which they're like, and if we do the surgery, you could lose the use of like other things. I was like, yeah, I'm good.
Maybe I'm just going to live with this.
I'm going to be okay with that. It's going to be good. So yeah, it was, once I started getting into that, it was like, yay, we can do these things. You can't do rehab when you're seizing because any sort of gains you lose potentially during a seizure.
Right.
But what I found out, and I already knew and I'd never said it out loud, was I lost the ability to read, which I don't know if anybody has not been able to read after I finished, 2 degrees and worked in HR for all these years, but it is something like next level.
It's got to be petrifying.
It's ridiculous.
I could not imagine that. I mean, you just depend on it so much.
Well, and they were like, okay, maybe it's an eye thing, right? So we went to see the visual therapist, the eye doctor, they're like, your eyes are fine. Then you go and they're like, maybe there's something else, like missing, maybe you have, like they go through all the physical reasons. And then you work with speech therapy because they have the connection. And it's actually more common than you think with brain injuries. A lot of people lose speech or the ability to form words, but reading is a learned behavior. So I had to relearn how to read.
Wow.
So my four-year-old was also learning how to read. So it worked out well. So we read frog and toad books, which I hate, by the way.
Did you hate them before? I
don't. And so this is the other thing. I also lost long chunks of my memory.
Wow.
So 17 to 24 is kind of gone. Like lots of pieces of my childhood are kind of gone, which is also very common. The seizures can cause permanent damage beyond the initial brain injury. Is kind of what I was told. It's like every time you have a seizure, you have a potential to do these other things, which is nothing anybody wants to hear, but at least they're being honest with me. And, as my friend said, she was like, the great part is she's like, you get upset about these things and you have a seizure and you don't remember why you're upset. I'm like, okay. Thank you. And I hate you all at the same time. But it was, I was in rehab for 17 months. So it's like not a short thing, but like, that's all I did. I'm like, so my goals initially, like they make you, so goal setting is kind of the way that they move you forward. Like, and when I said, so I want to be able to pick up my kids from school. So A, to remember to pick up my kids at school, and B, be able to show up and like hold their hand.
And be on time and get there and not get lost on my way home. And I mean, there's so many steps involved in that when you break it down.
Well, and be like competent enough that like the daycare workers are comfortable giving the kids to you.
Right. And that's your sort of fear. I'm like, I can't be labeled that mother who's incompetent, right? Like I can't have that badge of shame put on me. So there was a lot of workarounds, right? So once we figured out things weren't going well, my dad got like up to speed. The problem with like when you look fine, people don't understand. Like they don't understand the extent of, or even like, unless someone sits and think about it, when you can't read anything, which my children have food allergies. So that means I can't read labels. That's horrifying, right?
Yeah.
Like that's horrifying. So it was really important for me to make sure that like, so good thing my 4-year-old was a quick study and learned to read really young. But so that was really helpful because then basically I had a mini dictionary near me. So I was like, Alden, we should practice reading the labels at the store. Why don't you read this out loud to me? And I still have reading difficulty and my 10-year-old still reads to me. And that's just something that like, I sit at about a grade 6 reading level. That's where I'm at. That's how long it takes for recovery. And then you also have to decide how much time you're going to devote to like relearning to read and how much time you're going to devote to other things.
Yeah. Because you can't spend all your time relearning to read.
But it takes a long time to learn how to read.
Right.
Like in the first place, it takes a long time.
And it takes a long time to learn how to spell. And it takes a long time to learn English is terrible, by the way, to pronunciation is hard.
Yeah.
And reading it and saying it is a whole different. So reading is one thing, reading and saying it is another thing. Being able to read off cards and talk is another thing. So like all of these are different things you learn. So it's a combination of behavioral therapy and speech therapy, right? And occupational therapy, because they don't know if like you have mouth issues or whatever. So they're in there trying to make sure that like any sort of things are not, it's very ridiculous. There's so many people involved. And like, these people are the people you hang out with, by the way, right? So you better like them.
Yeah. These are your new best friends.
Yeah.
Your best friends. And they're great. And I felt that the skills I developed as like a case manager and working in HR, whatever, like really helped me, because I made sure that my husband and me, like I made sure some things stick. Every time I had a doctor's appointment, I wanted the medical notes. It was almost an obsession, because I know that they go missing, or when I show up to a specialist, I won't have the test results. So I have this file. It's like 4 inches thick, by the way, my like medical file.
Yeah.
So that nobody has to wait for a test result, because I've waited so long to see this person that if I don't have it, it's not a complete picture.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like obsessed with taking these papers around with me. And as I got better and we kind of like tapered out rehab, then you have to sit and go, what am I going to do with my life? Right. So I'm on long-term disability. I'm completely like, I have abilities now, but I spent 6 years in school and 10 years working, and
that's all gone.
It's all gone.
Yeah.
And so I was sitting here, and my husband, who is lovely, but was like, it's okay if you can't ever work again. And something in my brain like exploded, where I was like, no, I'm like, it's not okay for me to not do that. Like, that's part of who I am. And that's what I want. I'm like, I can't be that person.
Mm-hmm. Now the goal has shifted, right?
Has shifted to be a productive member of society, right? Like I would like to contribute in some way. So when my kids started school, I'm like, I have to have something more. So I said, okay, I called people I used to work with, explained to them what had happened, and said, here's my limitations. Here's what I can do. What do you think? Like, would you work with me? Would you like, can I like contract, do some like, and they're like, well, how many hours can you work? I'm like, not many, like maybe not at all. I don't even know. I'm like, can I just like volunteer? And they're like, oh my God. So my old boss was like, okay, look, he's like, I'd hire you even if you couldn't read. He's like, I'd hire you back. He's like, I think you'd probably be better than some of the people I had on staff right now. And I was like, okay, that makes me feel better. He's like, but you have to figure out what you want to do. He's like, do you want to come back and do this for me? He's like, I'd give you the West Coast, right? So he'd moved on, does health and safety, whatever. He's like, I'd give you the West Coast to manage, because like you can do that. I'm like, I don't think you understand the like depth of difficulty I have right now. And that was my problem. I looked the same, sounded the same, kind of was the same. And I'm like, even if I tell people, they don't believe me. Right. Which is really hard.
Well, you come off as like somebody who was extremely driven and ambitious and like a force, and you weren't not going to be able to do anything.
Right.
And so people probably thought that was still you.
Well, and people still think that's me, and I'm not going to be jumping up and down. And the thing I struggle with is now I'm like, at the beginning, you hide it. There's no reason. You don't even know who you are anymore. I'm like, am I a person with a disability now? Like, am I? And my husband's like, yes, many of them. He was like, what part of the brain injury thing did you not understand here? Right. And I was like, yeah, but am I really? He's like,
but there's so much stigma, I think, around that label, that as I'm trying to put myself in your position, you don't want to accept that label because of all the negative things that society says.
Right. Well, and also it's like, I didn't even know I don't have a job. I spent the last 2 years not parenting my kids. I have lost most of the meaning of my life, and I was like severely depressed. Right. So in all those moments, you're like, the hell am I here for? Like, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my life? So I had these moments. And the other thing about brain injuries is that like, I can't function for long periods of time. So now I also have complete noise issues. So like, I will never go to a concert again. I will never go to, like, I tried once and I went to see Lauryn Hill, and she was amazing. And I was like, I can't do this. This is hell. This is hell. We had to move houses because we lived on Bathurst, and I would sit there and cry in a ball at night because it was too loud. And my husband's like, I can't hear anything. And I'm like, I can hear everything. I'm dying. I was like, I think we need to move. And I was like, no, we don't. We have to move. My husband was like, we need to sell our house. And I was like, yes, we need to sell our house. So we sold our house and moved so that I could get off of Bathurst Street so that I could function, right? Because it's like
be somewhere quieter.
Yeah. But we couldn't leave Toronto because my kids were at Sick Kids. I had all my appointments downtown. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And my husband works downtown. He was like, so I'm like, we have to find some place like quiet that's also cheaper than where we live now. We have to sell our stupid house. And it was just, and also then we had to move while I'm like in the middle of rehab and like all this other stuff.
Super helpful with the move.
Super helpful. But we did it and it was fine. And we went on. But I guess it was sort of like in the most positive way, it's like, this is my opportunity to like reinvent myself and be okay with the person I've become, because I went to a support group for people with brain injuries.
Yeah.
And it was awful. It was awful because I haven't even accepted myself. Now you're surrounded with other people who like have also not accepted their self. It was fun though, because like the lights were dimmed in the room because everybody has like light sensitivity. And also I wore earplugs for like 2 years. I wore them up until like last year.
They're now marketing earplugs to like mothers and stuff. Yeah. And I personally have found, maybe it was always an issue, but it's much more pronounced now when it's really loud since Warren died. I can't.
I think it's a trauma thing.
I can't. It is.
Yeah. I also have a hard time with sounds.
Yeah. And it's very like debilitating. Like noise is very debilitating and like causes me like, if it's too noisy and like it's too much, or if I overdo it. So I don't know if you've ever heard the like analogy for spoons. Have you ever heard this for people with disabilities?
No.
Which I never heard of. And then I heard it and I was like, this makes so many sense. So the idea is that like everybody has, you know, a number of spoons, and people who have disabilities, you only have so many spoons available. So, you know, if you brush your teeth, you get 1 spoon. If you like go downstairs and have breakfast, you give up 1 spoon. So if you only have a limited number of spoons, you have to really decide how you want to spend your day. And you could get to noon and have used up all your spoons and then you're nothing. You can't do anything.
Right.
So it becomes a real learning to save energy. And I moved from someone who was like everywhere and always, and I was the person who like did my job, volunteered, was on 2 boards, was on my daycare board, like organized all the mom events. Like that was me. And then it was like all gone. So trying to get back to that place and then constantly failing was like such a punch in the face. It was just like, I kept trying and I kept like bottoming out. And I was like, maybe this is what I am. But then I decided to start, because I met with someone who was like a career coach, and I was like, okay, right? Like, or I had to meet with someone who's a career coach during this process, because they were like, they really wanted me to get a job. LTD finally was like, you're not going to work again. Thanks so much. Like, here's your thing, and have at it. Cause like they do assessments about what you can do, what you can do. And I was just like, and they're like, yeah, nothing. And I was like, thanks. That's, should I put that on my wall somewhere, or how's that going to work?
Wow.
Yeah, that was nice. And you just reach a, like, I think, you know, when they talk about like hitting bottom. So I hit bottom and like dug myself a deeper hole so that I could get further than the bottom, and just like laid in there for a while. And then I was like, I can't sit with the label of the person who's going to be on long-term disability for the rest of my life. So I did something that, as a disability advocate, I would never tell anybody to do. And I canceled my disability benefits. I said, I don't want these anymore. I don't need them anymore. I don't want you to call me anymore. I don't want anybody to show up in my house. And I fired my entire rehab team. I'm like, I'm done. I'm as far as I'm going to go. And this can't be my life, where all I talk about is MRIs. And, you know, maybe I could get another reading level up there. I'm like, I don't need this. I need to spend time with my children. I need to have a life, and I need to not worry about having to be home for my speech therapist, right? Like, you get to this point where you're just looking at each other, right? And I'm like, I don't want any of this anymore. So we did that, got rid of that. We went to New York on vacation, which like my husband planned or whatever, and it was still kind of awful because I was still, you know, still had a brain injury.
Yeah.
but I was like, welcome to my new life. I'm like, I'm just going to try. Just going to try.
Yeah.
But as part of that process, I met with a career counselor, right? Like they made me meet with someone. I'm like, she's an idiot. Like she didn't ask me to like what color, like she had all these tests and like all these other things. I'm like, this is stupid. I'm like, you haven't asked me anything about my life. You haven't asked me what considerations I would like about what I want to do or what difference I want to make. You haven't asked me anything about me. You're generalizing everything that I've done, which is no longer relevant. And I was like, if this is what career coaching is, this is some bullshit. And I'm like, I think I could do this better and differently because I know a lot of people. I've worked in most industries. I know what works. I know what doesn't work. I know what things pay. I know where the jobs are. I know the people who are hiring, right? Like, because I just talk to everybody, right? I know everybody. I make friends in line with Starbucks. And, and I said, you know what? This is something, if I only have one client a week, that might be perfect, right? Might be perfect. That would be good. I like, even if someone paid me $50 an hour, that would be good. I could do that. At least I'd feel like I'm making a difference. So I like said to my husband, I was like, I've decided I'm going to like try this thing. And he was like, okay. And I think I put it like East Toronto Young Moms Facebook group. And I'm like, I am doing some free 30-minute sessions for career coaching. And if you'd like to try, I'd really like to see if this is something that I'm good at. And turns out I am. So I'd already done some coaching stuff, which is kind of unfair in HR. So, but I never really jived with it because coaching relies a lot on, what do you think? How do you feel?
Right.
How do you? And I'm like, no, you know what? If we got an hour, like, let's cut to the chase, right? Like and I really focused on mothers and people who had felt like they didn't belong where they worked and didn't like, so it was the same story over and over. It was my story, right? Like it was my story. Like, why am I not fitting in here? And I did. I had like 2 clients a week and it was working out really well. And I didn't have a lot of computer work because I would meet people in person and we worked together on things and it was good. And it was bumping along. And then I picked up some HR work that required me because they gave me, the other thing you get in rehab is you get all sorts of fancy tools. So I have voice recognition software for anybody who would like to know about those things. I have a phone that talks to me and I talk back to it. And I can't use a lot of apps because they're actually not accessible. So I have run into a lot of weird problems because I'm not switching my voice recognition software. I'm like, I know how to use it. I'm not switching it. So that's a thing. I have a writing pad that converts my writing into text. So what they found is that I can write. I have a difficult time. Like it's hard to write when you talk. It's hard, right? Like it's hard to write like that. So I can write with a pen and then you click it and it turns into text so that, because it's really hard for me to type because I can't feel half my fingers. So typing is really weird too. Right. It's because I have nerve damage.
It would be.
Yeah. So I have that and that works out really well. And then I just have other things that will read back to me or condense things. But part of the practice with reading and writing though, is you really have to do it. Like you can't just talk to your computer all the time. That becomes your default. And then you will lose the ability, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's really weird. And so it makes it hard to work at coffee shops.
Makes it hard to work at coffee shops.
Yeah, because you have to talk to your computer, right? Like you have to talk while you write.
Oh, I see.
Which is why I wanted the writing pad, right? I was like, I really need something that I don't have to like talk out loud so that people can hear about like my angry feminism.
Yeah, so I can sit in Starbucks and I can work and no one has to listen to me talking to my computer.
Right. That would be nice.
Yeah.
So the Starbucks near my house had something called the vault. So it was an old bank vault. So I would go in there and do that. And I was like, no, I feel like a normal human because I get my own space. And
cool.
Well, but I have all sorts of things. I have like wrist things because my hands have nerve pain. I have like an entire filing cabinet full of like assistive devices that can do different things, glasses that change colors so that your eyes don't get strained using different things. Like they've tried everything. I have all the things. Like if they've made it, I've probably tried it and it's okay. So that got to the point where I was doing pretty well in business and I was doing pretty well and things were going well. And I got invited to a speaking event and it was at 4:30 on a Wednesday. It was a women's event. And I was like, I'm sorry, who's
people mothers?
I was like, who's picking up your kids? Right? Like how is that working? That's a terrible time. Yeah. And I was like, I can't I can't make it. Right. Like, so one of the things that like working for myself, my commitment was, I'm like, I need to be able to be there for my kids. Now that I can be there, I am fucking there. Right. Like pick up whatever. I'm like, we need to make up a lot of lost time here.
Yeah.
So I said no. And then I like sat there and I was like, okay, hold on a second here. Right. Like I was already discriminated against for being a mother at work. And I'm like, so now we're being discriminated against in women's groups. It's like, is this a joke? I'm like, so like mothers are like the bottom rung of like every level of employee that like does. And I was like, okay. So then I was like, you know what? I should find like a working mothers group, like about work. And I did. And I was like, ew, why are we talking about like body positivity? Like, what is this? I was like, this isn't work. This isn't like this isn't helping me grow. And I was like, okay. So in a fit of rage, I went looking to start, I was like, I'll start a Facebook group because that's easy. And I call it Moms at Work. And I said, the whole point of this is because I look around, I'm like, I know all the directors at companies, managers at companies, all these things, they're all moms, right? But none of them know each other. And the other thing that moms groups loves to do is divide everybody. So they like to have an entrepreneur group. They like to have a corporate group. They like to have a stay-at-home mom group. I'm like, enough. I'm like, we're already like divided or whatever. I'm like, everybody comes together so that we develop this giant network. And at the beginning, we had like 60 of us. I also just wanted people to talk to because I didn't like my husband at that point because we'd only seen each other for like 3 years. It was like a pre-COVID prelude. And I just was like, I just can't be this person anymore. So it was nice. And for the longest time, it was like 300 people. And then it just morphed into this sort of like, I realized that all the things I knew, other people didn't know. So when I started talking about pay transparency, people were like, so when I started with the group, I said, I'm like, you can't post in here unless you have pay range. And people went wild. They were so angry, like, oh my gosh, but then I can't post my jobs, whatever. I'm like, do you understand what this is? Like, you don't actually understand the reasoning behind like pay secrecy, right? It's like, so you can pay women and people of color less. That's that's the thing. And I was like, hold on. And I remember I did this Facebook poll. I'm like, who knows what pay transparency is and who knows why it exists? And it was like 2 people out of 300. And I was like, we have a serious problem. And I did an Instagram post about it. And I'm like, hello, hi, let me tell you a few things about like what this works. And what I know as an HR person is we know the budget. When I put a job posting out, you got to be kidding me that you don't think we know how much money we have to spend on someone. That's the stupidest thing anybody can ever say. So that whole like, we don't know, we're going to see what's on the market. I'm like, bullshit, right? I have hired thousands of people. We never don't know what we have.
Yeah.
It's a stupid line. But then the more you talk about things, about other things, you realize people just don't know. So I was like, great, now we're an education group, right? Like our goal is to educate and disseminate information so that people know what they're playing with. But then I got pregnant. So that was surprising. And also my neurologist was very unhappy with the fact that I was pregnant because this now gets complicated, right? Like,
yeah, I was going to say like how.
That was unplanned. Also, I was like, you know, like my kids.
You didn't hate your husband that much.
That was it was just like, it was not ideal, but I was like, can I? Yes. And I was like, you know what? Everything up to this point has happened for a reason, right? Like I'm actually in a better place now than I was pre-head injury. I was like, I get to spend more time with my kids. I know who I am as a person now. I've kind of like self-identified, like I'm okay with who I am now. Like, you know what? I'm 40 years old and my arm doesn't work and I can't read properly. I'm good with that. Because you know what? I'm like, I have a lot of friends and I'm comfortable and my kids are happy. And I did all of the things that, so me and a friend of mine who I shall not name because then she'll kill me. I'm like, every year we pick 5 things. These are the 5 things we're doing. And I was like, I'm getting my motorcycle license. I don't know how I'm going to do that. Or like, it's a terrible idea. Like for someone with a head injury to get a motorcycle, it's a terrible idea. I was like, I don't care.
Terrible idea.
It is a terrible idea. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, I would like to like die knowing that I got my motorcycle license. I could do that. So I did. I don't motorcycle very much, but I have the ability to do that. I can if I want to. So that just became important. I'm like, at this point, I've got nothing to lose. So people are like, how do you do this? And I'm like, because I spent 2 years of my life thinking I was going to die the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you seem like the kind of person that like if somebody says you can't do it, you're like gonna do it.
I'm gonna prove you wrong.
It's not even just like, well, whatever, I'm not gonna try. I don't feel like trying. It's like, no, I'm trying now because you said I can't.
Yeah, I'm a fairly competitive. I'm the most competitive person alive. Like I am just like, that is how I'm hardwired. And I saw a therapist who like specializes in dealing with families with people with brain injuries. Okay. And when I worked with her, the goal was to accept where you're at and be okay with that. And she was like, because you have a complete loss of identity. She's like, it's like a death, you know, and she's like, you've lost your mother, you've lost your father, like, you know what that feels like. You have to rebuild. And I was like, yeah, but I'm still here. Right. Like, so I'm like, I don't really agree with that sentiment of like, part of me died because I'm still all here. So then I realized, and you know, we are still in touch, of course we are, and she's very proud of me and a little bit blown away by the whole thing. But you know what? I was like, I have seen people do all sorts of miraculous things. But the problem is, it's like, for me, is I get incredibly frustrated because you bump along, you know, like Moms at Work has done incredible shit, right? Get to meet with the Prime Minister. They ask us to on EI committees, like we're the people, like tap us in, right? Like, especially during the pandemic, I was like, what the hell is happening here?
Yeah,
and I was
been
like,
a whole thing, right?
Well, it's a whole thing, but also like when the pandemic hit, what I knew to be true and what like Eve Rodsky, who I'm very lucky to call a friend, she wrote Fair Play about like the inequity of distribution of like housework basically, and everything else, the mental load. I was like, you know what's going to happen? I'm like, it's going to take all the people who have never been impacted by this because they have help and they have whatever to like really get screwed over before anything changes. And then COVID hit and it happened. Mm-hmm. So every person who had daycare and school and every working couple, all the women saw, women are leaving the workforce. I'm like, we are not leaving. We are being forced out. Like our hands are being forced so hard, we can't even like do anything about it because women are paid less. So if your partner makes 120,000 and you make 60, whose job are you giving up?
Right.
So I just like watched all this go down and very smugly was like, and I was like, oh yeah, now you're going to do a study about like how shitty this is. I'm like, there you go. But like we saw collectively that mothers were supposed to take it. Shut schools, why not? Shut daycares, why not? Shut whatever. I'm like, yeah, because you're going to be okay because I'm going to lose my damn mind.
Yeah.
That was the default plan. And I can never, ever, ever unsee that. And worse is, do you know who lost the most jobs? Women with little kids.
Women with kids. Yeah, women with kids.
Yeah.
With little kids. First on the chopping block, women with little kids.
Because the little kids are so demanding and they're not at school and they're not at daycare. And how are you supposed to work with a toddler on your lap and you're sitting in virtual meetings?
But that was
so
like,
now you're not being taken seriously. Right?
Or also, they did layoffs under the guise of COVID. There are a lot of companies who did not need to lay people off. And, you know, I had so many members who were like, I just lost my job. I'm the only one in my department. And through Moms at Work, we found out all sorts of fun things that a company had laid off, like the pregnant women and women with small children from various departments.
Wow.
Nice.
Under the guise of COVID.
Oh yeah, because it's COVID. So like, let's be like,
we have to lay people off. So
yeah, we have to lay people off. Pick some people from your team. Like maybe do it by seniority, maybe do it by whatever. So we know this to be true. It's just, it came out like guns a-blazing. We're very, very lucky that the women in that group are spectacular. So we have employment lawyers who are like, sign nothing, do nothing, say nothing, like, and we'll fight for you. But I said, but it's, you know, when they're talking about how far back women are set, you know, we always talk about, you know, gaps in your resume or whatever. I'm like, welcome to the 2.5 million women who just got kicked out of the workforce. Yeah. You know, have giant gaps on their resumes. So like, how are you, what I haven't seen is I'm like, how are you planning to help us? Right? Like, where's the, like, you know, they have a summer jobs benefit for like people under 30. I'm like, where's the one for mothers?
Mothers who have been like forced out of the workplace.
Yeah.
Whether it's under the guise of the pandemic or just by like slowly taking their work away when they return.
Oh no, because mothers are screwed by existing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like you return to work and it's like you experienced, you have different responsibilities. They make it unfavorable.
Right. That's it. So I have to watch it though, because I have now entered the place in my life where I'm happiest. I'm like, like a pig in shit. I'm like, I get to talk about feminism. I get to use all my, I get to do all my HR stuff. We wrote a program for women going back from mat leave that I really struggled to put out because I was like, oh, what if someone knows more stuff than me? What if someone calls me out that I'm not the person? And I'm very lucky to have a mentor who has been in family policy for years. And she was like, I know no one who is your equal. None. She's like, no one knows.
Is this imposter syndrome?
No, it's just me. No, I'm like, so let's not get into imposter syndrome, because I'm like, imposter syndrome disproportionately affects high-performing women.
Yeah.
Funny that they gave you a title to make you feel bad about yourself. And I'm like, all it is that I have no context about what other people know. How would I know what other people know unless I talk to all those people? I wouldn't. But then I realized I have talked to all those people because I worked with all of them, because you know how many return to work experts there are in Canada? Very few. 2 of them just retired. So that leaves me and the 3 other guys I used to work with. And in terms of maternity and paternity leave, I'm like, the EI table asked me, right? Because you have to do it, you have to live it, you have to so I'm lucky because I have all the experience. I have personal experience, HR experience, payroll experience, policy experience, and a group of 9,000 women who I'm constantly asking feedback for. So I'm in a real strange position that I'm very lucky to be in. But everybody looks at me and they're like, look how productive you are, look how whatever you do. And I'm like, and I have to watch it. Because as Jen knows, I'm like, I'm trying now. Everybody's very excited about Moms at Work. I love it. I love that they're there and they're happy to be there and that they're feeling heard and doing whatever, but I am one person, right? I am one person with 3 kids under the age of 10 and a husband with health problems and my own. And I found myself apologizing repeatedly for not being the person that people needed me to be. And Jen can attest to this too, but I'm like, social media sucks. People are mean, mean. I was just like, and it gives you pause. You're like, why am I doing this for strangers? Right? Why am I doing this and being yelled at and people getting private Facebook message me? I'm like, I don't know you. I don't know you. Right? You haven't answered my thing. You haven't done this. I'm like, it's a Facebook group. It exists for a purpose, but I'm like, I'm not on call, right? I have a job. So it got really tense, especially during the pandemic, because I was not coping well. I'm not sure how you two did during the pandemic.
Oh,
a lot of people weren't coping well.
And what that turned into was everybody, requiring everybody to be nice in that group and think it was hard for people. And for a long time, I had a lot of empathy and I was like, you're clearly struggling. And then I was like, but so am I. Right. So if you can't put on that lens and be that person, I'm like, I will never drop to that level where I but I can put up boundaries. I can put up boundaries.
I was just going to say that.
Right. So I did, and I have to. But I was saying, as Jen knows, I'm like, so I don't have much use of my left arm. I can't feel the left half of my arm because it's my ulnar nerve. So it's once it's crushed, it just doesn't work anymore. And then my right arm stopped working. I was like, I just can't do this. I can't. I've already done this dance once. I can't do this. So my neurologist, who has a 14-month wait list, whatever, I called, her assistant. I'm like, hi. She's like, hi, how are you? I'm like, this is how you're that person when you're on first name terms with your neurologist assistant, which is a really good idea, by the way, if you have a neurologist to be.
I mean, anybody who has an assistant, you want to be on a first name basis.
Oh yeah, you want to be on that person's good page. And I was like, my arm's not working. I'm freaking out. If I can, what happens if I don't have use of either arm? What happens then? Right? They're still there. What happens? And she's like, okay, let's look at it. So I've had nerve conductive testing, and she was like, it's nerve damage, right? And these are things that 5 years ago, they're they have a list of things that could potentially happen or things, whatever. And you ignore that list with everything in your being, because I'm like, I can't go there. I can't go there with you. Let's not think about the what ifs. Let's just rip up the list and hold on. But the good thing is I'm like, so yeah, I have to do physical therapy 3 or 4 times a week now, just to make sure that it keeps going. And that sort of nerve stuff causes carpal tunnel syndrome, which then causes tendon. It's like your whole body just hates itself. So but my arm jerks like involuntarily and does weird things, or it won't, like if someone goes to shake a hand, it just won't go. And so there's been a couple times where people are like, what's wrong with your arm? And I'm like, I can't do this. Like in front of my kids, in front of my whatever. I'm like, I don't want to do this with you, stranger, who I don't know right now. And you can't politely tell someone to fuck off, except you can with your eyes, right? This one. So I was like, I'm not going to do this to myself. I'm just going to tell people, because shockingly now, like I run into a lot of people, right? From the group, from people I know in the neighborhood, whatever. And I'm like, I had that conversation 3 times in a week. And I was like, this is becoming very uncomfortable. It's like if you shaved your head and people, like everybody has to comment on anything. And I was like, I don't want to be here, because my kids are already kind of like, they've been through this whole thing. They saw the seizures, they get worried my arm's not working. I'm like, I can't do this to my family. So that's what I put out there. That's all it is. And my neurologist, she's like, you have to slow down. I know that you don't want to. She was like, but this is your body telling you
have to slow down.
To slow down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as I was listening to your story, there really was this moment that really sort of struck me, which is when you were talking about like saying, I can't live for these appointments anymore. I want to be able to move on with my life. I want to enjoy my life. I want to spend time with my kids and my family. And you found a way to do that. And is it worth putting all of that in jeopardy? Because it sounds like you kind of had this period of like refocusing on your values and saying, you know what, like I'm figuring out who I am. And part of who I am is wanting to be with my family. Right. So if the social media and the work is like taking away from that and putting your health in jeopardy, then you have to put those boundaries in place, right? Like, and I just think we're not that good at doing that.
Oh, and I am the worst at doing that, because I really want to help people. I really want to like,
yes.
But when you get that, then you're not helping anybody if you're not helping yourself.
Right.
But it's hard to, as women, whether it's like conditioning or what, it's hard. It's like impossible to help ourselves.
Well, so the first thing I did, the first time I talked about my headache, because I didn't talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to, like I knew other people who had headache. I'm like, I don't want to be in the head injury groups or talk. Like, I just need to like not do this. Right. Like I just need to not be here. But I hadn't written in a very long time, and I'm a good writer. Or at least I thought I was. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to write blog posts. And if nobody reads them, it'll be fine. And if someone reads it, it'll be great. And if not, it'll be fine. But also it will help me like solidify why I'm here and what I went through. And I did. And I wrote a blog post called, And Then It Hit Me, about like my experience. And that, it was a reminder. I'm like, I have to reflect on the fact that like the thing that, so most people, when they get like a seizure disorder or whatever, like their breaking point, I'm told, is when like take your license away, because it's a real separation of like, a lot of people need their cars to get to work and do whatever. I never drove, so it didn't hit me hard, right?
It can be such a part of your independence, I think.
Yeah, loss of freedom.
Loss of freedom. And for me, so I knew this, my neurologist said, so usually when they have those types of conversations, they'll bring in someone else to be there, right? Like, because people get very upset and very angry or whatever. And I remember being in my neurologist's office, and one of the first things, and she brought in an intern, and I was like, and she was like,
what are you doing here?
You cannot pick up your children. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? She's like, you cannot pick up your children. You might drop them and hurt them, and you will be seizing, and you can't help them. And a part of me died. Like, I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, if you need to hold your children, you need to sit down. And I was like, that's it. Kill me. I don't want to do this right now. Like, how am I supposed to do that? I have a 3 and a 1 year old. How are you not supposed to pick up your children?
Right? That's what moms do.
That's
like it's a huge part of your day, actually, when you have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Nope. And I was like, that, and I said that, I'm like, that was the driver's license moment, wasn't it? And she was like, that was the driver's license moment. And she's like, I'm so sorry, but she's like, you can't. And she's like, once we get this sorted out, we will get it sorted out. Until then, you can't. And I was like, and I had a list of like, if you're walking with your kids, they have to be on the inside of the sidewalk. If you're like out, she's like, you really shouldn't be out by yourself with them in case something happens because they're so little. And like, so then you have all of these parameters. And I'm like, then what am I like?
Why am I doing this?
Why am I doing this? Like, I'm not even able to do this. Right. I was like, I remember it was like almost Halloween. I'm like, I can't take them trick-or-treating. And she was like, that would be very upsetting if they had to then deal with that. I was like, okay, cool.
So how did you work through all that?
I think it's, I think just the hope that like, it will, in my head, I was like, so to be very honest, I'm like, I had this plan. I'm like, this is not anything, I'm like, I will kill myself. That's the like.
Mm-hmm. No, I can imagine that would be something, it's an inevitable thing to think about.
Right. But for me, I was like, the good thing is like, I had a behavioral therapy team who was like, you need to tell us like if this gets real. And I'm like, but then you have your kids run by and you're like, I can't do that. But I was like, I couldn't do this to my husband and my kids. I was like, not only am I like useless, but I am a liability. If something happened to my kids because I had a seizure and they got hit by a car, right? Like, how do you do that? So I was like, this isn't working for anybody, but once the seizures became under control, then it like the safety factor backs up. Like once the medication works, then you're like, okay, all right, like things are moving along here. But like, I still don't like streetcar tracks, right? For that exact reason, right? I'm like, nope, like that's not going to work there. And I walk very close to the inside of the sidewalk, just in case, right? Like very close to a building, just in case.
Yeah.
And I don't like going places without sidewalks.
When was the last time you had a seizure?
Oh, it's been years.
But it's still there. The fear is still there.
It is, right? Like, and the fear of anytime you get, it's similar to like someone passing away. Like, so my mom, like, some people have smells or they have sounds or they have whatever. So it's the same sort of thing. Like if I don't remember where I put my keys, it's so upsetting. It's like, which is all the time, by the way, right? Because I
never remember where I put my keys
either.
I never remember where I put my keys.
But it hits you in waves.
Yeah.
Where you're like, okay, I'm not, this reminds me of this thing I was doing, right? Like I hate my couch. I used to have to lie on the couch because I couldn't get up the stairs and whatever. And now I'm like, I don't like sitting on this couch because it just reminds me. And that sort of stuff happens. But my kids are so much older now and it feels less on me. Like when your kids are really little, you feel so much more responsible. And now I don't have those same constraints because they're like, my big ones are 10 and 8. And they're just so much more independent that there's a lot less me involved.
Yeah.
Right. So as that happens, I feel like there's more space for me to, you know what? And it was a grieving process.
Yeah. That's what I was just going to say. I was like, you were grieving all of these things that you had been able to do before and the person you had been, and I think like, it kind of makes sense. I forget if it was a doctor or somebody who said it was like a death that to equate that to grief. But I think it also, when people do that, it takes away from the fact that we can be grieving something that's not dead or gone,
right? Like
that way,
So there's like Rochelle runs Being Here Human, and they talk about grief, but not grief in the typical sense, like because people have a very specific process for grief. Like it's society, right? Like it's typically quite the terminology is religious in nature, like only immediate family members are allowed to grieve. Like there's all these prescribed things where like grief hits you in all different points of life. When you lose a friend, right? Like I'm sorry, but like if my best friend passed away versus like one of my cousins, like we would have a different conversation because like this person is the key person in my life. But you're not afforded that level of involvement because the relationship is different. But people can grieve all sorts of things, like, when, even life experiences, and you can grieve the loss of a relationship or you can grieve a loss of whatever. But there's this sort of like, get back in there attitude. And I was like, that is not okay. And
But even after a major loss as well,
yeah,
there's that get back
God.
in there.
Yeah. And there's judgment. Like my mom passed away and my dad started dating not long after. And it took me a really long time. Like my sister was 17, right? Like I was 24, 17. And like watching the judgment that comes from other people and the things that you choose to do with your grief is just like so insulting, right? That you would profess to have any, like, why do you have any interest in like what my grief process is like?
Right.
And B, who are you again? Like, who were you and where were you during all of this? Like, so there's a lot of anger around that. And, and people will say things to me like, oh, is that still a problem for you? Or my best one, are you better now? Oh, I heard you had a thing. Are you better now? I'm like, yeah, I'm better now. You, right? Like, are you serious? Like, how do you say that to someone? And I think it's just a very like, everybody just wants you to get better and get back to normal. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
They want to, it's like we have these invisible running lists in our brain of the things we need to do. Like need to do in air quotes, because like you don't need to do them if it's on this list and you're looking to check them off. Like knowing that Allison is better, so I don't have to worry, if she still needs support. It's insulting.
Yeah. But also I'm like, why does that matter?
Yeah.
Like, what if I said, no, I wasn't? Then what? Then what comes next? Conversation, right?
Yeah. You don't actually want a real answer.
No, you don't. So
like,
it's weird. And I've had people say to me, like, so I filled out a thing. I was doing like a feedback thing, and someone said to me, an executive at a company, actually, she's like, well, you don't look disabled.
You can't say that. You can't say that.
Well, I'm also like, you're an asshole. Like,
yeah.
And I was like, is there something I should be doing to look more like that? I'm like, because you can't see me from the neck down. So that's stupid.
Like, what exactly would that look like to you?
Sure. I'm not sure. But like there is,
because all disabled people like look the same, right? It doesn't make any sense.
I know there's just so much.
But people are so ignorant.
They are.
I'm mad for you.
I've also found, this is the fun thing, I've also found that because I look quite normal, that I'm invited to more things about disability because people are more comfortable with that.
So you
totally
make people feel more at ease talking about it because
you don't look disabled.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever looking disabled is supposed to be.
And that's the whole thing. And then like, what do people with disabilities look like? I mean, they look different.
Everybody looks different.
Everybody looks different. I mean,
every human looks different.
Yeah.
Like it's very strange. It's a very strange thing that I was like, right, you want me there to check a box.
Right.
But I'm still fairly normal, and I'm also white, and I'm also like, so I feel these other things. So it's like, so there's a comfort level of it, but now you've like checked your box that you need. And I was like, I don't want to be a box. I'm like, I don't want to be a box. So I was it's weird.
Yeah. People think of, I think, disabilities as like, you've got to be in a wheelchair, or you've got to have a cane, or you've got to have a service dog, like, which is so limiting and not really reflective at all of what people with disabilities are.
Right. And I'm in the position where I'm like, I can hide as much as I want. Right.
It's almost an invisible, like they call it an invisible disability, right? Like people can't see it, but that doesn't make it any less real.
But I had a thing where like pre-COVID, they wanted me on a stage with the panel. I'm like, I can't do that. The lights, I can't do that because of the lights. And they were like, well, what do you mean? And I was like,
you'll be fine.
I was like, I can't with the lights, because then I will like have like the most blinding headache, and I can't. And also like, how many people are going to be at this thing? And they were like, well, 500. I'm like, I can't do that.
And I was like, applause, like the noise.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, no, like that's horrible. That whole thing is horrible. It'll be horrible. And because I tried once for a friend at her thing, and it was horrible. I hated it. It was everything horrible. And so I said, but I'm sure there's other things we could do. Do you mind if I like, wear ear? And they were like, well, you really need to wear an earpiece. I'm like, okay, I'm asking for accommodations. I'm like, as someone who like did accommodations for years, I'm like, you actually have to do that. And they're like, well, maybe this just won't work then.
Wow.
I was like, cool. Okay. All right. We're good. We're good.
All right. So I know where we stand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like not.
But is it okay? Do you think that because they can't see your disability, that they think you are
Being
exaggerating or making it up?
Or being, so it's kind of like, because my kids have food allergies, right? Like anaphylactic, ended up in the ICU, food allergies. It's the same thing with like, because there's lots of people who are like, well, I have a sensitivity, I have a whatever. I'm like, that's not a food allergy. Don't call it a food allergy because you're making me really fucking angry.
Yeah.
So that when you then show up to the restaurant and are like, my son's allergic to eggs, and they're like, yeah, okay, another one, right? And I'm like, no, not another one. It's like not actually that thing, but you need to take this seriously. I'm like, I felt the same way. It's just, but it's also like, it takes a lot of effort to accommodate people.
Mhm.
It takes effort. And some people are just not willing to put in the effort. And that's the hardest part for me. And I'm like, you ask so much of me, but when I ask you for a thing, you say, sorry, can't do it.
You can't give that.
Right. So I'm like, I just have to be like, I'm like, this isn't my space then. If that can't be a thing, then you've just answered my question for me. I don't want to be a part of this.
Right.
That's pretty easy. So it's just about like constantly testing your boundaries about what you're willing to do and what you're not, and what I'm willing to walk away from and I'm not, which is a lot of things, it turns out, and the things that I'm not willing to unsee. So if someone says something about me and the way, like anything, I'm like, I'm no longer 22 and embarrassed to say something. I will call that shit out and be like, I am no longer interested in this. That is not for me. Thank you very much. I only have so much time on this planet, and that hour cannot be spent with you.
Right.
That's
my
you're
like
trying to be more purposeful with your time and your energy. Like you were talking about the spoons, you've got to think about how you use those spoons, right? And you're going to use one to
Do
work
something
with.
that's going to make you miserable.
Yeah.
Right. Here's something. It's like, people don't like it when women say no.
Not at all.
We're not supposed to say no.
Right. But even other women
Don't
like it.
No.
So
because they don't say no.
Yeah. I got asked to do this other woman. I shouldn't say this because I'm on this podcast. But I agreed to this one time before, but she was like, she's asked me a couple of times. I'm like, I really don't have the space right now. Right. Like I don't have the space or whatever. And she gave me a 1-line response. It was like, well, maybe when my audience gets bigger, you'll have space for me. And I emailed back and I was like, listen, I was like, my aunt is dying. And I was like, my dad is on a plane to Vancouver. And I was like, I don't really need to explain myself to you, but it has nothing to do with your audience size. But I'm like, the fact that someone felt compelled to ask me to do something for free and then give me a bitchy response, I'm like, I'm not cool with that at all.
So I won't ever have the space and time.
And now I do not have the space and time. I'm like, watch it. Right. So people are pretty quick off the gun with emails. And I'm like, I have no space for that.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's so interesting, you know, in terms of just saying no, that we feel as though we have to explain those things.
Right. Well, that's what I got pissed off after about. I'm like, why did I just waste like 30 seconds of my life responding to her stupid response? I'm like, now I can't do this. I'm like, now I'm the person. I'm like, I should have just deleted it and remembered it and never spoke of it again.
Right.
Right. But that's what we do, right? We're like, no, it's not that. And I don't want you to think that. And we decline invitations or whatever. We always like
make an excuse.
Qualify it. It always has to be
like,
qualified.
I'm sorry, I can't come because blah, 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 blah. And I know myself, especially in my younger years, like I would make up something to get out of, like, in order to say no, I would make up an excuse. Like I already have plans, but I'd be lying because I just didn't know how to say no. But I also wanted to protect myself and my time.
Well, you saw this on steroids during COVID. Like, remember during school shutdowns, and people are like, are you sending your kids back to school? Are you sending your kids back to school? Are you whatever? And like I would be walking with a friend because we do these like opposite languages, and she's like, I'm like, I just wanted to let you know that I'm doing it. I'm like, you do not need to explain yourself to me.
No.
These are your kids. This is a pandemic. You need to stop. And I ended up having to write an Instagram post because I could see people. It's so heavy on them. Am I making the right choice? And I'm like, you are. You're making the right choice for you. But look how programmed you are to explain yourself to complete strangers.
Yeah. And my husband sometimes will be like, you don't have to explain yourself.
Right.
Like, why are you explaining yourself? I'm like, because that's what women do.
Right.
Yes.
Because interactions that include women end up being very divisive.
Yes.
Not always, but you know what I like.
But you've spent your whole life having to explain your, like the expectation is that you provide an explanation.
Yeah,
yes.
It is.
Right?
Yes.
So if you just say no, oftentimes people will dismiss you, ignore that no, as we can see with the multiple sexual assaults that happen on a day-to-day basis. Women are completely ignored, gaslit into thinking that like you didn't just agree to something, or an explanation is demanded. Well, why? Right? How many times have you said no and then they say, well, why? When you were younger, because that's a very common thing.
Yeah.
That's with you, right?
I'm like totally like I asked for an explanation from a friend last week. I invited her to something and she's like, I can't. And I was like, why? This is a fun thing. Because to me it was. And it was just not like, it wasn't for her. And now I'm like kicking myself. I'm like, I totally just did that.
I did that to someone, and I'm sure I've done it to some people at some point. Or
my line now is no is a complete sentence.
Yes. Oh, it is.
Right?
Not to my 6-year-old, but
no, like that. Obviously, like children are exempt from this rule, but for everybody else,
they shouldn't be.
That's my next thing I'm writing. No is a complete sentence, and it is.
It is,
and it takes a lot of, even advocating for everything that I need. Like that's it. No.
Yeah. I can't do that, or I won't do that, or I'm not willing to do that. I don't want to do that.
It doesn't work for me. It's
Doesn't
okay to
work.
not want to do things, first of all.
Right.
Do you find that you have much firmer boundaries than you did before? Okay.
I have to. And I'm like, because
totally.
And the other thing is that like, I always say this, I'm like, Moms at Work wasn't supposed to be a big group. That was never the plan. I'm like, I planned to have 300 people and we were just going to hang out and have drinks. It was going to be in Toronto and it was going to be super fun. And you know what? It started growing, and then the pandemic hit, and I felt really, really guilty to deny people space that they needed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like really, really. And I was like, I don't want to let people in. I was like, and then I was getting these Facebook messages, please, I lost my job. I don't know what to do. Someone told me that this is a safe space where I can ask questions and I really need this. I don't know what to do. I'm like, what are you supposed to say to that? Right.
Yeah.
You can't say no to that, not during a pandemic. And so I was like, fine. And now we have 9,000 people. I don't even know how that happened. And I was like, ugh, like I didn't sign up to moderate and check in all the time.
I mean, that's a lot of people.
A lot of people.
Moderate.
It is.
So
I was like, so it's become a struggle for me to set boundaries there. It's a struggle for me to set boundaries on social media because I want everybody to be okay. That's who I am inherently. I'm like, I need everybody to be nice to each other and I want everybody to be okay. And I want to make sure they're getting the support that they need. But I'm tired.
Well, yeah. And your body's telling you that you're tired.
Right. So that's my husband. He was like, you have a choice. Either you deal with this or you don't, and then you won't be able to deal with anything.
Right.
So pick. And I was like, stop being correct. Like,
so what are some of the boundaries now that you're putting in place for yourself?
So I have to take frequent breaks all the time. Like during the day, frequent breaks, get up, like not just like as a nice to do or like a reminder thing. I need like some sort of like shock gun or like, cattle prod to like get me out of my desk to turn off. I have a very hard time like moving from one space to another without like leaving things behind, because that's how my like brain is hardwired. But mostly it's boundaries around like, I want to spend a lot of time around people. So I'm not good at creating time for myself. And that has been a struggle for me because it's really important for healing and for my brain to like have time by myself. But I as a person, I don't want to. So that's a struggle. And then just realizing that I don't have to be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to pick the things that you're doing and you have to say no to other things.
You have to be deliberate. You have to be purposeful. I just wondered, do you have any limits in terms of like time, like that you're not going to respond to social media after a certain time or certain days or that type of thing? Because you are maintaining this enormous group.
Yeah. And I'm lucky I have like people like moderate. And sometimes I'm like, so I ended up having to, like I said, I'm like, I need to hire help, even if I need like make less money or do whatever. I'm like, it takes me a really long time to do things, right? It just in general, it takes me a long time to do things. And I was
and
like,
when you have limited resources of time.
Right. So I have to decide, I'm like, what I want to be spending my time doing. It's hard for me to learn new things, which is another fun part about entrepreneurship is you just have to learn all the things.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I only actually, people are going to hate me for this. I'm like, I only work like 9:30 to 1 Monday to Thursday because that's all I can really do. That's what my ability is. And then what I'll do is I'll like go off and come back on at like 4 o'clock for a little bit. And then I'll like check in before bed just to like break it up. But that's kind of my max. Otherwise, like I worked longer than that today. It was a total mistake. I had to lie down for 2 hours. Like there's no like, oh, I overdid it, whatever. It's like, oh my God, my eyes is not working. And my brain feels like it's on fire. Now I have to like lie in a dark room. And that's not fair for my husband because I'm like, I didn't self-manage. Now he's got to get stuck with the kids for 2 hours because I got to
do all the things. Yeah.
So it's like that negatively impacts everybody else around me. And I just can't do that to them.
Yeah. No, I think I think it sounds great. I know you're like, everyone's going to hate me for this, but I think it's admirable that you're working to your ability. And that's all, you can ask of yourself.
And you were able to create something that fit within those parameters.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. We all have different abilities though. That's the thing. Like of when we can be most productive at work and when we can, it's unfortunate that we can't recognize that in everyone. Because then that doesn't need to be a differentiator of somebody's, like it's just like just sitting and listening to it. It's like, well, yeah, like certain people are only good. Like I'm only good in the morning.
Right.
Probably in that window that you work, that's the only time that I'm any good.
Right. Oh, that's the only time I'm any good.
But I don't have like a reason for that. Right.
Nope.
So it's really interesting.
Well, and also everybody's been forced to conform to a regular workday or like to shift, like, so people are like, oh, I don't fit into this. And I'm like, nobody does. Nobody works for 8 hours a day straight. Well, nobody does. So that's why there's these pushes for 4-day work weeks and people want part-time. And I'm like, I don't want part-time because I do whatever. It's like, I get really tired. I'm old, right? Like it's like,
but this ability to work in pockets of time
that suit you
and that work, right? So I don't know how many hours you're actually putting in, but just the idea that you're working when you can, you're working till 1:30 and then you're taking a break and doing a little bit more at 4 and then checking in before bed.
Well, and also like I have kids, right? Like, so maybe like I legitimately am working, right? But it's just like the level of focus that it requires to do writing or do other things is incredibly different than it is to do other things. But that's like,
and probably exhausting.
Also the taking care of kids is work too. So you probably are doing more than 8 hours.
I have an incredibly equitable relationship with my partner now because
you have
to, right?
Yeah.
So someone said to me, like, oh, women love to do this. What are you guys having for dinner? I was like, I don't know. My husband makes dinner every night.
Ooh, me too.
That's Tisha.
And this is a whole thing I could go off about sometimes because it drives me nuts. Because then when I say my husband does the cooking, it's all like, oh, I wish someone did the cooking for me. Oh, you're so lucky. I'm like, when have you ever said that to a man? Your wife makes dinner every night. Oh, you're so lucky.
Yep.
It's not luck. This is just how we divide our labor.
It's not common though that the husband does the cooking.
It's not common.
I'm a terrible cook. Like terrible. Like I'm that person who like burns grilled cheese.
Yeah.
And kids will like scrape off the burn. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So let's just do everybody a favor and not do that to people.
By the way, people would say that to my husband, that he was lucky to have me cook for him every night. And
yes, maybe because you're quite a cook, but it's very, very
no, it's not
uncommon that anybody in the staff room at work would ever say that to a man.
Now I'm going to flip it, especially because in my situation, just the idea of having anyone else cook for you sounds like an amazing luxury.
Yeah.
So it's not
I also am not a cook, and there was always this thing growing up where my mother and my grandmother would be like, what are you going to do when you're married? What are you going to do when you have kids? And I used to say, I'm going to marry someone who can cook. They're like, oh, good luck with that. I'm like, well, I did it.
Yep. You did.
You know, and that like isn't the only reason I married him, obviously, but he likes to cook.
It's pretty up there. It's like on the top three reasons. So like,
if you like to eat, then it should be. In being conscious of respecting boundaries and your capacity, Allison. I feel like we should wrap this up because
we should.
Great.
Me too.
I would like to know, what would you hope that somebody could like walk away from having heard your story, and a nugget that you would hope that they would walk away with that could maybe improve their life or give them a different perspective?
That when you see a person, you don't know anything about them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what their struggle is. You don't know what happened to them last night. You don't know their past. You don't know their history. So be kind all the time, because you don't know what someone else has been through.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good one.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Now What? If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. Your ratings and reviews help more people like you find our podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone you think would love it. Until next time, remember, your hard times are the chance to write another chapter.